The talk today is called Big Ideas, and the reason for that is that I spent the week in Chicago at the International New Thought Alliance's 107th Annual World Congress. It wasn't actually annual, they skipped a few years during World War II, but this is the 107th one of them that the group has done. And for this year, what we did is we brought together the leaders of all of the different branches of New Thought to talk about what we have in common and what makes us different. And there are five main channels or groups. It's not really denominations. It's versions of the teaching. Religious science is the one that we're in. There's also one called Unity, which a lot of folks have heard of. Divine science actually was the first one. It turns out 1888 was when divine science was created, and a year later Unity was founded by the Fillmores, 1889. Ernest Holmes, who founded religious science, actually was ordained as a divine science minister for a while because he just had this philosophy. He didn't want to have a church, and so he wanted to be a minister. And then the rest of the thing grew up around him. And then those various teachings have been having babies. From the religious science side came Agape, which is Michael Beckwith and his group in California, which has become an international movement as well. And the Universal Foundation for Better Living, which was founded by Dr. Johnny Coleman in Chicago and has now spread out and is a teaching of its own. That one grew out of Unity. So we all have a common heritage. The philosophy came from Ralph Waldo Emerson and some of his writings. But Emerson, of course, didn't tell us how to do any of what he said we would be able to do. He said that there is one, there's an oversoul, and we are all reliant on ourselves to create our lives. In his essays was just some wonderful insight and uplift. But he didn't tell anybody how to make it work. Phineas Parkhurst Quimby came along a bunch of years later, and he actually figured it out. He said, okay, we can do healing through mental work. And a bunch of experiments, and actually did some healing. And then Thomas Troward kind of put the explanation on it. And then the teachings all started to coalesce and come about from there with Unity and divine science and religious science and the rest of them. And what we found this week in the Congress is that we are all saying the same thing in slightly different ways. The metaphor I came up with is like when you go to Baskin Robbins, I might like chocolate chip and you might like pralines and cream, but none of us is going to be getting cauliflower. It's all ice cream. We are at the ice cream store and we're just doing our own different flavor of the ice cream. So there was a wonderful synergy amongst the groups because these people don't really spend a lot of time all together at once. And somebody floated the notion of, let's all teach the same thing. Let's all do the same foundational courses, and then let somebody go for whatever particular flavor they're going to go to. Because we have one standout concept that really makes New Thought, all of these New Thought teachings, different than everything else. We believe that there is one creative power, one divine love, one source that creates everything, that shares itself as all of its creation. And it shares itself as each of us, and we're each using our access, our participation with that one to create our lives. Almost all the other religions in the world have the notion of God out there, that we can ask a favor of, and perhaps if we deserve it through some mechanism we don't understand, God will say yes. Or God might say no, or God might say maybe, or God might say later. But it puts all of the decision-making, those philosophies, the decision-making is all done by God outside of us. When we look to God in those practices, we raise our eyes to the heavens. And in New Thought, in all the branches of New Thought, when we turn our eyes to God, we close them and look within, because that divine creative power is within us. The question that gets asked by a lot of people is, why has God forsaken me? And we don't ask that question. Somebody comes to us and says, why has God forsaken me? We say, well, how has God forsaken you? Because there's a personal experience that's going on, and maybe there's some learning to be done, and maybe there's a hidden belief or a false belief or something that we need to unearth. So we want to understand, what is it that makes me think that God has forsaken me, so that I can then start to deal with that. So there's a whole bunch of ways that the nuance of the New Thought teaching comes about, and it's different ways of saying the same thing. So you've heard as above, so below, as within, so without. And what we're saying with those is that there is that oneness And that oneness that is everything around us is within us as well. There's a microcosm. I am a microcosm of the macrocosm. The macrocosm is everything, the universe. And all of the laws, all of the principles, all of the processes that work anywhere work everywhere, and they work for me and for each of us as well. That's a big deal. That's what makes the New Thought teachings, all 5 of them, or however many you want to count, that's what makes them all different. That's what puts us all into the ice cream store. That's our Baskin Robbins. And then we get to decide how much of that is going to be based on the teachings of the Fillmores or Ernest Holmes, or how much of it comes from Scripture, whether it's New Testament, Old Testament, Bhagavad Gita, or whichever ones we want to be using. There is wonderful richness that comes from all of those different sources. And this was a really exciting week to talk about what we have in common and how we can move this New Thought teaching onto a bigger stage and into a grander space. One of the things that we talk about a lot is that New Thought is open at the top, and that was actually the title of Ernest Holmes' biography. And every time I've heard that, open at the top has meant that this teaching is not limited. And it was contrasted with Christian Science, where Mary Baker Eddy, who founded Christian Science, says, all you need to read is my book and the Bible. Nothing else is required. Nothing else is involved. It's a closed ecosystem. And just continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into those. And that, to an extent, has worked. But open at the top, the way that I understood it up until we got to this conference, is that there are new teachers coming along. There are the Don Miguel Ruizes and the Elanya Van Zants and Deepak Chopras who are teaching the same thing in a different way. Dr. Wayne Dyer reinvented 8 or 10 different religious and spiritual practices, wrote a book about them, and has continued to move the process forward with all of that. So part of it is about growth. But the other really cool thing about being open at the top is that when we open our top, we can allow a new idea in. Something that I didn't necessarily understand or believe before. If I can open myself up to a new awareness, to some new insight, to something different, then I get away from even the most subtle forms of fundamentalism. Like, that's the way we've always done it. And what I can do is I can then have some brand new experience. So I now have a second meaning of open at the top. And for me, that's really powerful. Another great idea that came forward is question your own thinking. If we want to get intelligent answers, we need to ask intelligent questions. And a lot of people think that the media is not doing that right now, not asking intelligent questions. Media a lot of times wants to ask incendiary questions so that we can continue the fight. So there's something that's going to sell newspapers or ads. But if we want to have intelligent answers, we need to ask intelligent questions to understand what the field is looking like, so that we can be inquisitive, that we can pursue, that we can say, is that true? Is that true for me? Does it always have to be true? Is there a new possibility there? Because we are the agents who get to create something new in the world. And New Thought is really well poised to do that, because we will not teach you what to think. New Thought does not teach you what to think. Our highest aspiration is to help teach you how to think, to understand how your mind works, to understand how your thinking process is going, to understand what's hidden in the nooks and crannies of your subconscious that makes you think that things need to keep on going the way that things have been going, to make you think that God has forsaken you under those circumstances where it feels like a challenge, to clear out the brush and allow something new to come into being. The other thing that was really powerful this week is to put some legs on New Thought. We have a tendency to talk amongst ourselves and understand the teaching and deepen into the teaching and use that to become more prosperous or more peaceful or live in a more harmonious way. But if, in fact, we understand that what we want to create is a world that works for everyone, and a lot of us talk about that, then how do we put legs on that? How do we move our feet in a way that's going to actually move the ball forward, to make the world work better for everyone? But a lot of my teachers thought that activism and volunteer work was not part of New Thought. We don't get ourselves involved in that. And as a New Thought organization, we don't subscribe to something where we're going to be aligned with a particular political party or a particular stance. But when we're in meditation, when we are understanding what we're observing in the world around us, when we're asking intelligent questions and we're coming up with intelligent answers, there is every possibility that we will be called to take some sort of action, to become an activist, to go and to march, to even to take a stand and get arrested. What kind of world do I want to live in? It's not like we're not spiritual, we're not physical beings because we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're both. We are physical beings having a spiritual experience, or spiritual beings having a physical experience, or some people like to say we're spiritual beings having a spiritual experience in human form. But here we are in human form, and we get to put some activity on that. So when you're talking amongst yourselves, if there's something that you're called to do, invite your friends to do that too. Are we going to do that? At the INTA Congress, there was a great idea for how we can take that activism into the world and make it work during the Anton retreat this fall. And it got an immediate yes about being able to take action and be involved in the community helping. So I will give you more information on that as it unfolds. But there's tremendous possibilities going there. And the other thing that is really powerful in this teaching is the healing. The healing, which is the revealing of the truth. And next Sunday is a Fifth Sunday healing celebration, so we're going to focus on that. The practitioners are going to be doing a ritual together where we're going to light a candle to bring some new healing into our experience. But this teaching is all about healing. It is about being able to take the experience of life that we're having now, choose something different, pivot away from the problem and look towards the solution and invite that new experience in. And it's not just, I had a change of heart, a change of mind, a different perspective that made something different. I heard in detail from one of my new heroes, Shad Groverland. He's the executive director of Unity Worldwide Ministries. And he talked in his presentation on Wednesday evening a lot about Myrtle Fillmore. Now, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore were the founders of Unity in, as I mentioned, 1889. And she was always the ill child in her family. She had tuberculosis, and she'd had it since childhood, and it was a problem for her. A bunch of other lifelong maladies that Myrtle Fillmore was dealing with. And she did the work. She isolated herself to the point where she could just get with her own consciousness and understand what her beliefs were. So she had a lot of support in doing that. And her realization was that as a child of God, her life and being are a divine inheritance, and no part of that inheritance includes illness. No part of her divine inheritance includes sickness. And she healed herself. She was no longer the ill child. She no longer had tuberculosis. She was healed. A complete physical recovery from this supposedly lifelong illness that there's no way that could go away. Her husband, who was a businessman and a real estate developer, kind of thought that was particularly cool, especially since he had one leg that was shorter than the other. And the bones and joints and stuff that were ossified. And so he learned the technique from her, and he wound up with both legs being about the same length, and to the point where he wasn't limping and he was getting around particularly well. That's a pretty powerful story. It's not a Jesus-level story of raising the dead, but that's the model that we have. This is a healing practice. We can change the experience that we're having of our lives. And it's not limited to people who are in New Thought Philadelphia or just the folks who have studied with the people we've studied with. As long as we are willing to accept that we are one with the infinite creative power that creates everything, anything is possible. Anything becomes possible. And the great question, it was one of the series of questions that Shad asked, and I'm going to ask you this as well. And you can do this by a show of hands. You can click the raise hand button, or you can just wave. Do you believe you're a spiritual being in a physical experience? Okay. Do you believe your spiritual self affects your physical self? Yeah. Do you believe your mind and thoughts affect your physical experience? Do you believe that your doctor would agree with all of this? A couple of us. Yeah. So the question is, why do spiritual beings in a physical experience follow the guidance and treatment of professionals who treat us like we were just physical organisms on a chemical experience? There's nothing wrong with the chemistry set. There's nothing wrong with the people who are doing all sorts of healing modalities. The important thing to remember is that it's all part of that one. God shows up as the prayer and as the pill. If we are praying to the pill, we've missed the point. There is always the possibility for us to look at the bigger picture, to open ourselves up to a brand new possibility, to stop listening to the people who say, well, based on all of the ways that I've watched these chemical reactions or these processes unfold in the past, this is the prognosis for you. This is the diagnosis for you, and this is how it's going to go. They don't know. This is an infinitely creative universe. Anything is possible. So, complete spontaneous remission of all of the symptoms is possible. And if you find yourself disagreeing with that, Myrtle Fillmore cured herself of tuberculosis. Okay? I'm not even going to ask if anybody who is in the Zoom right this morning has had tuberculosis. But it was a big deal. And it is a big deal to be able to recuperate from that. So that's like an entire week's worth of stuff I was opened at the top, and somebody put a big idea funnel and poured a bunch of stuff in, and it's still sorting itself out. But there's lots and lots of possibilities. There's lots of newness that's coming on. The two most wonderful things that happened in a really wonderful week. First of all, we got all the leaders of these organizations, and I think that there were 9 or 10 of them, because of course you need 9 or 10 people to represent 5 teachings. That's a whole nother story. But the leaders said, let's get together regularly just for a quick weekly touch base, because we have so much in common, and there's so many ways that we can be uplifting each other and supporting each other and avoiding reinventing the wheel. So that was one of the things that was really that struck my heart. And then on the education panel, they said we need to do an entire conference on education, on how we're teaching, what we're teaching, and how we can cooperate with each other for the teaching. Because the idea that each of these 5 organizations needs to come up with their own curriculum and stay in their own lane and make everybody think that the other ones are in another lane, they're not. They're different flavors, okay? Sometimes you want peanut butter fudge and sometimes you want chocolate chip, okay? And that's okay. And you can even change your mind from time to time. That's okay. There's richness to be had from all of them. I was a church development conference probably 10 or 15 years ago, and the guy who was running it was from Unity. And there were divine science people and religious science people and Unity people there, and he kind of tongue-in-cheek said that the difference between religious science and Unity is that religious science has really good music, and Unity has Jesus Christ. And, which flavor are you looking for? Because it is available for you to choose the flavor that's going to fill you. One of the other things that then I'll close with this that happened is next August in Chicago is the 130th, I think, Parliament of World Religions, which is an interfaith gathering, which has been spectacular. It started in Chicago 130 years ago. New Thought is now recognized as one of the world's religions, and all of these organizations, these 9 organizations, are getting together to have a single one presence to do something together at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. So if that's something that's singing to you, of getting together with people who want everybody in the world to be working together, that's something you put on your travel calendar for next summer. All kinds of possibilities, all sorts of newness that's available for each of us individually and all of us together. So open yourself at the top, claim some new good, take on some new possibilities, think about what you want to think, and allow the healing. Because you deserve it. You are wonderful. And so it is.